They laughed when she told them. Not just a polite laugh, but that kind of amused disbelief people give when they think you're overreaching. Every time Maria tried to explain herself, she saw the same expressions, eyebrows raised, lips curling into half-smiles, the occasional chuckle as if they were all in on some joke she didn't understand. She was used to being underestimated. It had been that way since she was a teenager, her quiet voice, her soft demeanor, the way she often kept her ideas to herself. People assumed she was the type to fade into the background. But this time was different. This time, she had something that mattered to her so deeply that letting it go would feel like cutting out a piece of her own heart. It started the day she told her friends she was writing a book. Not just any book, but a love story unlike anything they'd heard before. She explained that it was about two people who had never met, yet somehow already knew each other. Not in the way of vague familiarity, but as though they'd lived 1,000 lives together before this one. Her title, Already Married to You, drew puzzled looks. What does that even mean? One friend asked. Sounds like some over-the-top romance novel, another teased. Her co-workers at the bookstore chuckled about it behind the counter. Even her mother, who had always encouraged her creative streak, frowned slightly and said, I don't know, sweetheart, are you sure people will get it? But Maria wasn't chasing trends or writing to impress anyone. She was telling her truth, wrapped in fiction. The seed of the story had been planted years earlier, the day she met James. It had been an ordinary afternoon in a small cafe, the kind where the air smells of roasted coffee beans and old wood. She was typing on her battered laptop when the place filled up and a stranger asked if he could share her table. Their eyes met briefly, just long enough for something unexplainable to happen. It wasn't attraction, not in the conventional sense. It was recognition. A deep, bone-deep knowing. She had never believed in love at first sight, but this wasn't even that, it felt like remembering someone you've loved forever. The thought struck her that night as she lay in bed, unable to sleep, it's like I've already been married to him for lifetimes. It was absurd, and yet the feeling stayed. They exchanged polite small talk that day in the cafe, nothing that would warrant a love story, and soon life swept them in separate directions. But Maria carried that strange spark with her. She wrote about it in her journals, explored it in poems she never showed anyone, and eventually, she knew she had to build a story around it. She wrote quietly, in the hours when no one was watching. Early mornings before her shift at the bookstore, late nights when the world was quiet except for the sound of her fingers flying over the keys. She poured herself into the manuscript, every tender thought about fate, every aching question about timing, every moment of longing she had felt since that day. She didn't tell many people about it at first, but when she did, the responses stung. Friends dismissed it as whimsical nonsense. Claire, her closest friend, read the first few pages and said, Maria, no one's going to connect with this. People want drama, breakups, twists. This idea is too out there. That night, Maria sat staring at her laptop screen, her hand hovering over the delete button. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was just fooling herself. What if no one understood? What if no one even cared? But something deep inside her refused to let go. That same quiet voice that had nudged her to start the book whispered again, tell it anyway. So she did. For months, she wrote without knowing if anyone would ever read it. She revised, edited, and polished until her eyes ached. When she finally finished, she sent the manuscript to several publishers. The rejections came quickly, polite, formulaic notes thanking her for the submission but explaining it wasn't the right fit. After the third rejection, she nearly closed the door on the idea completely. Then one day, an email arrived with the subject line, Already Married to You, Let's Talk. The editor, a woman named Lydia, wrote, When I first saw your title, I thought it was odd. But I opened your manuscript and read the first page, then the next, and by the time I reached the end, I was in tears. This is not just a love story, it's about recognition, about the invisible threads that connect us before we even meet. I think people need to hear this. As it turned out, Lydia had her own story. She had met her husband in an airport, and within minutes of talking to him, she had felt certain she'd known him her entire life. When I saw your title, she told Maria, I thought, that's exactly how I felt. The book was published with a small print run. Maria didn't expect much, but something remarkable happened. Readers began to share it online, quoting passages, underlining lines that spoke to them. Letters and emails began pouring in. Strangers wrote to her, I met someone years ago and never understood why it felt like we'd always been connected, until I read your book. Others told her, your story gave me permission to believe in something I've always felt but couldn't explain. The people who once laughed began to change their tune. Friends who had rolled their eyes at the title now said it was beautiful. Her co-workers proudly told customers, our Maria wrote this. Her mother called her late one evening, her voice trembling, and said, I'm sorry I doubted you. I understand now. You wrote something people needed. Maria learned something powerful in that season of her life. When people dismiss you, it doesn't always mean you're wrong. Sometimes it means they haven't seen what you see yet. They haven't walked where you've walked or felt what you've felt. That doesn't make your truth any less real. The success of Already Married to You didn't make Maria proud in an arrogant way, it made her grateful. Grateful she hadn't given in to doubt that night with her finger on the delete key. Grateful she had listened to the small voice inside her. And most of all, grateful for every reader who had found their own reflection somewhere in her words. A year after the book's release, Maria was invited to speak at a small literary festival. She was nervous as she stood on stage, the lights warm on her face, the audience waiting. And then, in the third row, she saw him, James. The man from the cafe. The one she'd thought about for years. He was smiling, and in that moment, it was as though no time had passed at all. After the event, he approached her. I read your book, he said, his voice soft but certain. I think I understand now. She didn't ask what he meant, some things don't need explaining. They stood there for a moment, two people who had shared an unspoken connection for years, both knowing that whatever came next, the truth of that connection had already been written in their lives. Maria walked away from that day with an even deeper understanding. Sometimes the world will laugh until you prove them wrong. Not with loud arguments or desperate persuasion, but with the quiet, steady act of creating, of sharing, of telling your story exactly the way it needs to be told. If you're watching this right now, maybe you have something inside you that others don't take seriously. Maybe they've dismissed your dream as silly or impossible. I'm here to tell you, it matters. Even if only one person understands it, even if it takes years for anyone to see it, your truth matters. Somewhere out there, someone is waiting for what only you can create. And when they find it, when they finally see what you've been trying to say all along, it will have been worth every moment of doubt. If this story touched your heart, join us here on Everyday Grace Stories. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we keep telling the stories that remind us who we are, how we're connected, and why grace, everyday grace, is worth holding on to.